What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV, and in this video, I want to do a video request that was requested quite a while ago by Stephen Curry, the GOAT. He wanted me to rank the Chicago Bulls teams of the 1990s, the championship teams, from worst to first. And I thought I would do a video series rather than just one long video. And, of course, the Chicago Bulls, one of the great dynasties in the history of the NBA. When I think of dynasties, I think of the Minneapolis Lakers of the 50s. I think of the Boston Celtics of the late 50s and into the 60s. I think of the Showtime Lakers of the 80s. Of course, the Bulls of the 90s. I think of the Laker teams of the 2000s, the first three-peat being Shaq and Kobe, and the second championships being Kobe, Gasol, and Metta World Peace, and Bynum thrown in there. What a waste of a talented player in a lot of ways. And now you have the Golden State Warriors, who I think are on the threshold of a dynasty. I think if they win a fourth title, which most people think they will, I think that pushes them into dynasty status. In my opinion, 3 NBA championships during a decade isn't quite a dynasty. I think 4 is the standard to me. If you win 40% of the championships in a decade, I think that's pretty much like a dynasty. And I guess there's even some people who will talk about the Spurs, like, oh, they're a dynasty. And they're one of the great championship teams of the 21st century, but they never won back-to-back. And I think during the 2000s, they won 3 championships, 2003, 2005, and 2007. I think had they won one more championship in 2009 or something like that, or better yet, had they won back-to-back in 2007, 2008, then I probably would include them as a dynasty. But because they didn't, by my standards, I mean, people have different standards, but I wouldn't call them a dynasty. But in 1997-98, Chicago Bulls, to me, are the weakest link of the championship teams. They were a great team, but you clearly see that age and injury had affected the Bulls. Michael Jordan, during that season, averaged 28.7 points, I believe 5.8 rebounds, I think it was, and 3.5 assists per game. He shot 46.5% from the floor, only 23.8% from three-point range, and 1.7 steals per game, and 78.4% from the free throw line. Michael struggled mightily from the three-point line because of an injury to his shooting hand. I think it was some ligament issues or something like that. Now, in the past, I had mixed it up with the injury sustained to a tendon in his shooting hand from supposedly a cigar cutter, but that actually came right before the season started during the strike year. But it's not a Mandela effect or anything. I do remember him injuring his finger before the start of the 97-98 season, and that affected his outside shot. He started off the season shooting poorly. I definitely remember during the month of November when the Bulls only went 9-6 and started the season 9-7. I distinctly remember Jordan shooting as low as 38% from the floor. Ultimately, throughout the season, and in particular when Scottie Pippen came back, he got his field goal percentage up all the way, like I said, to 46.5%. Some of it was eschewing the three-point shot. He noticed that he was struggling from that shot, that distance. And for the most part, unless he was wide open, he stayed away from the three-point line. Another reason why he struggled with his shot was Some of it was fatigue. Um, a lot of it was fatigue, to be honest with you. For the first time in a long time, with the absence of Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan had a larger responsibility, a larger workload that he wasn't accustomed to at that particular age. At age 34, Michael Jordan had to be not only a scorer, he had to be a playmaker. He had to essentially be a point guard or a facilitator. And he wasn't used to doing that. He wasn't used to playing that role. And because it was something that he was unaccustomed and out of practice of doing, he struggled for a while. Like I said, the Bulls struggled. Scottie Pippen missed, I believe, 38 games due to a back injury that he suffered during the 1997 NBA playoffs. And when he came back, so I got to say this too. Some people think that Scottie Pippen stayed out a little bit longer than he would have. Not that he didn't injure his back, he did, but some people think he stayed out a little bit longer just to make a point to management about his value. If my memory serves me correctly, Scottie Pippen made $800,000 during that season, whereas Michael Jordan earned $34 million. And even then, I thought that that was a slap to the face. You know what I mean? This is a guy that during the peak years of his career from 1990, maybe 2 to 1996, was seen by many as the best overall small forward in the game. There's other people out there that you can name. Maybe Dominique Wilkins still was the tail end of his prime, or you could put the rising star Grant Hill out there. Maybe you have the sharpshooting Glenn Rice as a candidate. But most people felt that Scottie Pippen was the best overall small forward. Here he was during a season where he came in boasting 5 NBA championships and multiple all defensive teams, making less than $1 million for the season. Matter of fact, I believe Phil Jackson earned more money than Scottie Pippen that year. I think Phil Jackson made something like $2 million. Dennis Rodman came into the season about 36 years old, not showing any major signs of slowing down. Um, he averaged, I think, 4.7 points per game, a league-leading 15 rebounds a game for the 7th consecutive season, a record, and I think 2.9 assists per game. Tony Kukoc, who during the 95-96 season was the league's sixth man of the year for that year, averaged over 13 points a game, shot 45.5% from the floor, and 36.2% from the three-point line. Steve Kerr, for his standards, struggled somewhat earlier during the season, shooting under 40% from three-point range, but ultimately shot nearly 44% from that distance. But overall, we look at the bench. Randy Brown, Jason Caffey, the newly acquired Scott Burrell, Dickie Simpkins, Rusty LaRue, who I don't think played more than 1 or 2 seasons in the league, Bill Winnington, Joe Klein, Judd Bushler, Keith Booth, David Vaughn. When you look at this team, that bench, some of these guys were older. Some of these guys had down seasons, They really didn't have much of a bench. And because of this overextended the starters. And then, like I said earlier, a lot of these guys were older, okay? Their offense looked sloppier. There were many games where the Chicago Bulls looked like the Chicago Bulls, but then there were some games where they looked old, and they had to rely more and more on their defense to win games. I remember that year was a lot of games where it got ugly. It was a lot of games that they won 83-77 or something like that. I remember, I'll put it like this. I remember looking at the box score of games I couldn't see, and I would see something like Jordan, 9 for 26, Pippen, 2 for 14, Kukoc, 3 of 9. And I'm looking at these shooting percentages, and the Bulls didn't shoot as well as their opponent, but somehow, some way, they won the game. And that's what it's all about, winning the game. And during the season, the Bulls averaged only roughly 96 points per game. And like I said, this was the lowest scoring year for the Chicago Bulls, although scoring was down overall in the NBA. Some of it was due to the three-point line being pushed back out to its original distance. And but ultimately, the Bulls adjusted to uh, once Scottie Pippen arrived. It created more spacing, the spacing that they were accustomed to in their offense. Guys really flourished, and the Bulls ultimately finished with a 62-20 record during the regular season. But because Utah won both meetings against Chicago, Utah would have home court advantage if they played Chicago in the NBA Finals. This would be a big boon for Utah, if they were to play Chicago, which they did. Um, During the playoffs, the Bulls, for the most part, looked like the Bulls. But unlike in prior years, they weren't dominating their opponents in many of these series. Um, they did beat the New Jersey Nets 3-0, but many of these games kind of went down to the wire. I believe one of these games even went to overtime. I can't remember which one, but it was, like I said before, offensively they struggled at times, but it was their defense which won most of these games. And that's how you do it, you know what I mean? During the Eastern Conference semifinals, the Chicago Bulls played the Charlotte Hornets, and they made quick work of the Charlotte Hornets in that series. And it was the Eastern Conference Finals that was one of the great series of all time, in my opinion, especially during that era. I think that out of all of the teams that played the Chicago Bulls, even including the 92 Knicks, I think the Indiana Pacers provided the greatest challenge to the Chicago Bulls at that particular time. Fatigue was the Bulls' enemy during that season. Fatigue. Um, and you could clearly see it on the Bulls starters, in particular, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Earlier during that series with the Pacers, the Bulls looked really good. Their offense looked fluid. Michael and Scottie were quick on defense, and they were effective on offense. But as the series progressed, as Michael had to run through so many screens at an advanced age for an athlete, 34, 35 years old, running through screens, trying to keep up with Reggie Miller, fatigue began to affect them. And their shooting was affected. And overall, in some ways, their team defense was affected. And the series went all the way to 7 games. And it looked for a while like the Bulls were vulnerable. The Bulls quickly went down to a 21-7 deficit. But ultimately, the Bulls came away with, I believe it was something like an 88 to 83 victory or something like that. And the Bulls went on to the NBA Finals. But the Bulls were extremely fatigued as a team overall. And they were going against a team now, the Utah Jazz, who had more belief in themselves than ever before, and now had the advantage of home court advantage. That's why I'm trying to stop D4 too. Franchise, so in the NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls played the Utah Jazz, and they did drop the first game of that series, and were down 0, 1-0. And the Bulls quickly regrouped, and they won the next 2 games. They won the next game at Utah. As the scene shifted to Chicago, they won Game 3. I can't remember which game it was. It might have been Game 4. But one of those games was a blowout. The Bulls won by 42 points. They won by the final score at 96-54. And that 54 points by Utah Jazz was the lowest scoring game in a playoff game ever since the shot clock era. And the Bulls went into Game 5 of that series up 3-1 in the driver's seat and looking like they might win the series at home. But then Karl Malone came out and dropped 39 points at Chicago at the United Center and denied the Chicago Bulls a home victory. So the scene shifts to Utah. The lead sliced to 3-2, and it looked like Chicago might be in trouble. Even though they're up 3-2, the Bulls are a very, very tired team at this point. You could just see it. They looked exhausted. It looked like a lesser team probably would have folded and packed it in. Michael Jordan just went ballistic offensively. Had he been a younger man, had he been closer to his prime, he might have scored 60 points in Game 6 of that series. But Michael Jordan refused to let his team lose, refused to give in to his declining physical condition. And the Bulls, behind his 45 points and clutch plays toward the end of that game, went on to win the game and the series 88-87. And the Bulls wound up with what would be their last NBA championship, their 6th of the 1990s. For the series, Michael Jordan was named the most valuable player. It was his 6th most valuable player award for the NBA Finals. For the series, he averaged 33.5 points per game, 4 rebounds, 2.3 assists, and 1.8 steals. He shot about 43% from the series. Pretty much on the low side, but hey, this is when he was on the downside of his career. Shot 31% from three-point range and I think 81% from the foul line. Scottie Pippen, despite injuring his back in the last game of the series, averaged 15.7 points, 6.8 rebounds, 4.8 assists, 1.7 steals. But he only shot 41% from the floor and 23% from three-point range. But he did shoot 83% from the foul line. His back really did affect his shot and his aggressiveness. But when you couple in the fact that the Bulls were at the tail end of their dynasty, age was really affecting them, injuries and the deficiencies that they had going into the postseason. For them to win an NBA championship when they were not necessarily the odds-on favorite well, they might have been the favorites in some people's eyes, but they weren't the overwhelming favorites. For them to do what they did with probably the weakest bench uh, of any championship team just goes to show you how great this team was. But still, I think that this was the weakest of the championship Bulls teams. But tell me what you guys think.